So this kind of begs the question, how can we achieve that same kind of flow state in work and in life? So it doesn't always take those extraordinary moments, right? It can be achieved, and we'll talk about that today. So today we're going to identify the flow state. We're going to go through some practical examples. We're going to learn strategies to find flow in work and in life. And then we're also going to explore those opportunities to create an environment where you can access flow a little bit more readily. Essentially, it was this point in the movie where, they were kind of showing him the beyond, if you will. And they went into this area where there were like little kind of video clips, if you will, of people doing various different activities. So there was somebody who was a tattoo artist. There was somebody who was, doing like a play. So various different aspects, right? So essentially just that to show that, again, it doesn't have to be an extraordinary moment, right? Or an extraordinary activity. This is something that we can access. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. But if you haven't seen that movie, it really is a really good, cute movie as well. So if you have kids, they might quite like it. Okay, so what is flow? That's kind of where we're going to start this off. So we kind of have to start off with, he's often called the father of flow. So his name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I know it's a mouthful. I had to actually go on Google to learn how to pronounce it correctly. But in an interview, he also described flow as a state where that your ego falls away. It's where time flies, every action, movement, thought kind of flows just inevitably from the previous one, like playing jazz. Your whole being is involved and you're using your skills to the utmost. So, and a little bit more about Csikszentmihalyi, he became curious about happiness after seeing the pain and suffering of Europeans around him during World War II. So he found that many were unable to live contentedly, right? They were losing their jobs, their homes, general security during the war. So these observations led him to become curious. So really boosted his curiosity about what makes life worth living. And he began to explore various different things from art to philosophy, religion. He was seeking answers. That curiosity had been sparked. Ultimately, his curiosity led him to pursue education in the field of psychology. So you'll often see his name as well if you've ever researched positive psychology. He was kind of one of the founders of that as well. So his exploration really led into causes of your optimal and those positive experiences. He was very specifically intrigued by artists who would get lost in their work, so immersed that they would disregard basic cues for food, water, and sleep. Several of his interview subjects described their experiences through the metaphor of a water current carrying them along. So thus, flow, the term flow was born. So from there, individuals he found were most creative, productive, happy when in this state. So, this kind of gives you the foundation. How was this thought? How did this come to be? So, and it kind of makes sense. That feeling is very similar to when you see water flowing. So moving on and building from there. So when does flow happen? How does it happen? How can we access this feeling? So flow is that point where it's often described as that balance between challenge and skill. So a person's skill is, again, just as Csikszentmihalyi explained, it's using your skill to the utmost, being totally involved in overcoming the challenge at hand. But also the other side of this is that challenge is manageable, right? You have the skills to be able to, to overcome this challenge. And it's also forms kind of a springboard for learning new skills and increasing your challenge if needed. So another point about flow is that sometimes we're like, oh, I feel like I'm in flow when I'm watching television, right? So when you access flow, you do have to be an active participant, so not so much passive. So when we watch television, it's more of a passive, right? So looking at this graph, kind of notice that interplay between how challenging an activity or a task is, as well as your skill level in that activity. Okay, so when we take a look at boredom, so in that boredom phase, right, there's kind of like a low challenge. So think about when you first start a job, right? You're really excited. You're learning all these new things. You're really learning about the organization that you're working for. So there's that period of excitement because you're learning new things. But then some of those tasks that you learned in the beginning, as you move down the road over months and years and so on, maybe it's not that shiny new object, if you will. Okay, so maybe you kind of get more into that boredom phase when you're doing a task that you've done kind of, you've been on that treadmill for a while. So then on the other side, right, we've got like arousal. So we'll see arousal kind of bumpering flow, as well as control. So arousal, it's very challenging, and maybe you don't quite have the skill set to overcome that challenge yet. So again, we come back to that springboard for learning new skills. Okay. And then on the other side, you've got control, right? So potentially, if you're in that control state, you can access flow by making the task a little bit more challenging. Okay. So I want to kind of do a quick little activity. So hopefully you'll join me in this to kind of demonstrate this. Okay, so I don't know if you've ever heard, we're kind of on that band theme. Okay, so we're going to do a little activity. It's called body percussion. So we're going to start out with a simple pattern, and then from there we're going to build onto that pattern. Okay, so when I say boom, boom means patting across your chest. So it makes kind of that boom sound. Okay, clap. We've got clap, right? And then snap. Okay, so boom, clap, snap. Okay, so those are our 3 movements. So we're going to start off with a kind of simple pattern here. So we're going to go boom, clap, and we're just going to do that for a couple of rotations through. Okay, so here we go. You ready? All right. So boom, clap, boom, clap, boom, clap, boom, clap, boom, clap, boom, clap. Okay, so we kind of got that. Hopefully we good. Thumbs up, hopefully. So if I asked you to do that for an hour, do you think you might hit into that boredom phase? Potentially? Okay. Well, so what if I added on to that? Boom, clap, snap. Okay. So we're going to go through that just a few times. So you ready? And I don't know about you, but it helps me when I say it. All right. So boom, clap, snap. 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 All right. So we kind of got that pattern. Okay. So likely when you kind of got the pattern down, you'll be able to maybe challenge yourself a little bit more by picking up the pace. Okay. All right. So how are we doing with that pattern? Pretty good. All right. Well, I'm going to challenge you a little bit more. All right. So we're adding on a few more things. So we're going boom, clap, snap. Okay. Then we go boom, boom, clap, snap. So just like when we start off with any new thing, right? It's going to be challenging. Okay. So boom, clap, snap, boom, boom, clap, snap. Boom, clap, snap, boom, boom, clap, snap. All right. So once you kind of got it, see if you can pick up that pace a little bit. So boom, clap, snap, boom, boom, clap, snap. Boom, clap, snap, boom, boom, clap, snap. All right. So how's this pattern for you? Is it a little bit more challenging? Is it taking you a little bit longer to kind of pick up on that pattern? All right. So what did y'all think of this activity? Did it kind of, my hope is that it hit home, that it's kind of that balance between challenge and skills. And as we started challenging ourselves a little bit more, and then we could kind of get into that rhythm, right? So thoughts on that activity? Anything y'all would like to like to add? I need to not multitask. Yeah, absolutely. It goes back to what we talked about earlier. You felt a little bit worried? Yeah. So when you feel a little bit worried, it's probably because, in our mind, right, we have that frontal cortex, right? That's kind of telling us our inner critic, if you will. So when you start to feel that worry, it can really impede you getting into your personal flow. So, there's a lot of things that interplay here that can impact whether or not, you're getting into your flow state. But hopefully that was a little bit of fun, a little bit of a brain break as well. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on. So I want to now kind of move into talking about the cycle of flow. So kind of going back to that activity we just did, right? We have the struggle phase. So again, anytime we're learning something new, or maybe you have a new project at work, maybe you joined a new committee, whatever that looks like for you, we have the struggle phase, right? We're learning the processes, we're learning how to integrate things. So we have that struggle phase, which is kind of that more uncomfortable, maybe our anxiety likes to creep in a little bit. Because maybe we have where we want it to be perfect. We want to make sure that we're doing a good job at whatever we committed to. So that's our struggle phase. We have to go through the struggle phase in order to access flow. So from there, have you ever had that moment where you just need to walk away from whatever you were working on? Maybe you were working on your syllabus for the upcoming semester, and you've looked at it for so long that you're really not getting much done at this point, right? You're struggling. You've looked at it for several hours. You just need to get that release. You need to take your mind off of that challenge, that problem you're trying to work through, and get up and do something else. So maybe you shift your mindset to another task. Maybe it's more of a task that you've done for a long time. So it's really kind of that knee jerk, it's a habit, right? It's something you can do with your eyes closed, if you will. Okay. Or maybe you get away and you go for a quick walk. It's amazing what even just a quick walk can do for your mindset, your motivation when you come back. All right. So we go from struggle to then release, and then you kind of get into your flow state. All right. So during flow state, nitric oxide is released. So that's a vasodilator, right? So it flushes your stress hormones out. So when we typically think of stress hormones, cortisol is kind of the one that typically bounces in our mind because it's a very well-known stress hormone, and releases the big five is what they often call in flow. Okay. Big five neurochemicals, which we'll talk about a little bit more in depth in the next slide. So then after you've kind of accessed flow, there is a recovery phase after it, right? Because you just released these big five neurochemicals, you've reached your flow state, you're in your flow state, but then your body needs to recover and replenish. Okay, so you have your recovery phase, which is typically the phase that is a little bit unpleasant, not very comfortable. It's the phase that we don't really enjoy, but we still have to go through it because, again, we have to replenish ourselves. Okay, so those are kind of the 4 phases of the flow cycle. And in order to access flow, right, we have those phases that aren't as comfortable, specifically the struggle phase and the recovery phase. So in order to access flow, we need a little bit of grit. We need a little bit of resilience and that perseverance to continue pushing through. Now let's talk a little bit about the big five. So we mentioned on the previous screen, the big five neurochemicals that are released when you access flow. So what happens when these are released, right? You have that massive motivation, right? Boost in motivation. There are three kind of main things that flourish when these neurochemicals are released: your motivation, your creativity, and learning, that learning process, that learning transfer really too. All right, so you've got that massive boost in motivation, your creativity is really thriving, and data acquisition, pattern recognition. Have you ever, when you access flow, it's almost that feeling of like, wow, everything's just connecting the dots. Like it's almost that effortless, just everything is kind of working together. It's kind of a beautiful moment. More lateral thinking. So when you access flow, we have, that frontal cortex, right? Which sometimes can be an inhibitor or a blocker of especially creative processes, motivation, learning, because it's our inner critic. And sometimes it's really hard to tame that inner critic, or it's that part of our brain that's like, oh no, that wouldn't work, right? So when you've accessed the flow state, you're more open to possibilities, right? You're more able to make those connections. Things just, again, I'm saying flow again, but it flows easier, right? Flow is flowy. Things just start to happen. So just to kind of re-solidify what we've kind of talked about, flow is when you get all five at once, right? You've got that release of those 5 neurochemicals. You kind of lose that sense of self and time. And you also have that positive feedback loop, kind of that you're on the right page, you're moving forward. So we kind of got the foundational components of flow, what it is. So now how can we find it? How can we set ourselves up to potentially reach or tap into that flow state? So the first thing I want to say is flow follows focus. So, we talk about mindfulness quite often, mindfulness, meditation, those types of things. But really, flow thrives when you are in the here and now, right? You're not worried about things in the past or what could potentially happen in the future. So flow follows focus and drives you into the now. And then it kind of helps to talk about maybe what are some potential, now these are going to be unique for everyone, right? What are some potential individual triggers or group triggers, right? Because we can access flow as an individual, but we can also access flow in a group scenario. So when we think of individual triggers, our purpose, our passion, when we're feeling really passionate and purposeful in what we're doing, we're paying more attention. It's connecting us more deeply to our values and our beliefs. Risk, it needs to be a little bit of risk, right? Because risk drives focus, which again, focus drives flow. Okay. So, there's people who love to do kind of free rock climbing, right? Like without a harness, because there's that period of, that risk, there's that risk there, which is driving their focus to really focus on each move that they're making, right? But there's also that side of embodiment, right? Connecting to having that mind-body connection. Having clear goals absolutely helps. And then again, that, we talk about it a lot here at Alamo, but feedback is important because, it's kind of, it lets us know we're on the right path. We're continuing to move things along and move things forward. Now, when we think of group triggers, right? So we have potentially those shared goals that we're working towards. So when we think of shared goals, right? I mean, WIG comes to mind, that shared risk. But there's also that side of autonomy. Yeah. So when you think of group flow, what's a good example? If anybody wants to take themselves off mute or put in the chat box, can you give me an example maybe when you've experienced group flow? Okay, see some in the chat. Orchestra group performance, absolutely. You have to have that flow to really create that harmony of sound. Has anybody ever felt like group flow maybe when you're in a team meeting, right? And you're brainstorming some ideas where you just kind of are building off each other's idea. Volunteering with the food bank, awesome. Love it, absolutely. Those are awesome examples. Yes, Rhonda, in meetings with free flow of ideas, absolutely. You know, there needs to be that that openness, right? Because when people have closed mindsets, it's much harder to access that flow in a group atmosphere. Team sports, oh, great example, definitely. Perfect, thank y'all so much. So absolutely, when you're performing brainstorming sessions, team sports, collaboration, all of those things can really, you can access flow in a group. So I've been doing a lot of research on flow. I find it honestly very fascinating. So there was this story I came across, and I actually wasn't aware of this, but I wanted to share it with y'all because I found it really, really interesting. So we think of how can we create an environment where flow thrives. So Jeff Bezos, you know, I have the Amazon logo there, which if you're like me, you've become very best friends with Amazon over the last 2 years. It's a really interesting day when I don't receive a box. At least that's what my husband tells me. But anyway, Jeff Bezos is pretty famous for incorporating something called the institutional yes. So what this is comprised of is that you can't just say no to an idea. All right, so let's say somebody in a supervisor or a manager role, they can't just say no to an idea that was brought up in a meeting, right? And if they did, they would have to write a 2-page paper on why they were saying no. So kind of an interesting way to bring about flow or have that environment where flow can happen, especially when it comes to a team or a group environment. It kind of goes along with the first rule of improv, right? Improv acting is that you keep moving things forward. So imagine somebody saying, hey, you know, I've just seen a glow in the dark monkey in the kitchen, right? Your job is to kind of keep things going, like not saying, hey, that couldn't happen. There's no way a glow in the dark monkey could be in the kitchen. Your job would be to keep it moving. So maybe you would say something to the effect of, wow, you know, if we lost power and there were no lights, the glow in the dark monkey would be very useful, right? So essentially, the benefit of this is that you're not denying any idea, right? So it's having that open mind to accept this idea as a possibility. And what Jeff Bezos was really trying to do by implementing this is to encourage people to take a little bit of risk, right? And which in turn drives innovation. So kind of interesting. On the flip side, so my daughter recently this year, she started Montessori. And, you know, the thing about Montessori education, it's really a high flow environment because it's really built around some of these flow triggers, right? You've got autonomy, you've got that uninterrupted concentration, that self-directed learning. That's huge, right? Because when you are engaging in self-directed learning, it's something that you are choosing to do, right? So you probably have some interest, something has sparked your interest to do that or to learn more about that. There's also that deep embodiment that we were talking about a little bit earlier. There's that learning by doing, right? You're connecting that mind and your body. All right, bringing it kind of towards that goal of 1. So any other thoughts on flow triggers? Any things that maybe you've implemented that have helped you access flow? If you'd like to share, feel free to take yourself off mute or chat in the chat box. Okay, well, I'll give y'all a second to kind of think about that a little bit. All right, so out of these 3 things, which do you think are flow inducing and which one is not? So you've got watching TV, you've got video games, you've got kind of a work scenario. If you want to chat in the chat box. Oh, stream of consciousness writing. I love that. Absolutely. Oh, I love this, Maria. In class, so flow in class when students are having in-depth conversations about the topic. One time a student said he was so engrossed in the conversation that he lost track of time in class. Absolutely. I love that. Okay. So which one would not be flow inducing? So we had a conversation a little bit earlier talking about being an active participant, right? So things that are flow inducing are when you're an active participant in whatever the task is at hand, whatever you are doing. There we go. Sorry, I was trying to move to the next slide. There we go. So watching television, right? You're not an active participant. And this might just be me, but I know sometimes when I watch television, I have my phone in one hand and I'm watching, right? But yeah, so it's more of a passive activity. Now, what if there's too much flow? I know we've talked about all the good things that can happen when you access flow, but what if you're overflowing? But okay, I know it wasn't that funny. I'm a little corny. But what happens if you are maybe have too much flow? So there's a side of this where obsession could come into play, right? So we are so engrossed and we love the feeling of being in flow that we try so hard to get there. Okay, so we become obsessed with getting there, which there's probably some anxiety that comes into play there. So obsession is more anxiety driven. So, we talked about the 4 stages of flow, and sometimes we steer clear of those things that don't make us feel really good. But in the flow cycle, you have to go through the struggle phase, all right? And then the release, and then into flow. And then you also need that recovery piece, which if you've ever started off the year and you haven't worked out in like 4 months and you start working out and you have that muscle soreness, it's kind of like that, right? We have to get through that and continue keeping that moving. So that's just something to think about because it can be pretty addictive and lead to where you grasp for it. You're really trying to grasp for it. So, you kind of need to find that environment that sets you up for it and that allows you to kind of naturally get into your flow. All right, so what is your flow strategy? And I put N equals 1 because you're the person who knows what that will look like, right? You have years of flow data, right? Backed up that you could tap into and figure out, okay, what are things that I need to incorporate in my environment so that I can move into the flow state. So you are the person that kind of knows what's worked for you, and you can tap into past experiences in order to kind of build out your strategy for flow. And maybe your strategy for flow in the classroom as well. How can you set up a classroom, a teaching, like an environment where your students are thriving and able to access flow and have those deep conversations and those types of things. I put two pictures on here. One is from about, I want to say it's 2 years ago, right when the pandemic was really, I was working for a different organization, and they had this little activity where it was May the 4th be with you. So it was find whatever you have in your house to dress like a character. All right. So that's me on the left-hand side. Wrapped around my waist is my daughter's baby blanket. Wrapped into my hood. That was one of those mesh, like bags that you put your swim stuff in, and I just cut it. And then around my upper torso, that's a trash bag. Oh yeah. It's a trash bag. So anyway, I loved it. I was able to tap into my creative side, and I tell you, I had so much fun. I even made my husband get involved because we were both working from home at the time. And we built his lightsaber out of toilet paper. So we had like it was awesome. I don't have a picture of that, but it was a lot of fun. I really felt like, I was able to access flow and just having a good time and being able to tap into that creative side. And then here down in the corner, over the holidays, I love art. I've always loved art. Actually in 9th grade, that summer, I took a summer session that was art. That was art. So who takes art in the summer? I did, because I loved it. And it was something I really enjoyed. And I was like, oh, that'd be something fun. So anyway, I was doing some canvases with my now 5-year-old. And I made this flower out of a cereal box. So I made that out of a cereal box. I spray painted it. So anyway, I totally accessed flow when I was doing this art project with my daughter. And so, that kind of shows you can access it, of course, in your personal life, but how do you access that in work? So I find that I access flow during work when I'm doing kind of these in creative endeavors, right? So like when I'm creating a video for something we're about to launch, or I'm creating a slide deck. I actually really like to create PowerPoints. So when I'm able to tap into some of those things, I find myself able to find flow in my day-to-day, even at work. At work, it can be a little bit more difficult, right? Because sometimes we do those more mundane things that would like check an email, not my favorite thing to do, but something that we have to do, especially after a holiday, right? So I want you to just think just for a few moments, what does your flow strategy look like? Think back, what has allowed you to access your flow state? If anybody would like to share, I'll give you all a few minutes. If anybody would like you to share.
Christina, I think one of the things one of my bosses told me is to brain dump. And so like sometimes all your ideas are muddled in your head. And if you just kind of put them down in a certain way, just like, if you're writing, and then you can try to organize them from there, just getting them all out. And that feels like it helps.
It does, because it's almost like, you have it all up in here, but when you put it down on physical paper, you're seeing it physically in front of you. Yeah, it can help you connect the dots a little bit easier when you see them all out. I love it. All right. Well, feel free to, if you want to share in the chat or if you want to take yourself off mute. But just remember, you can read a whole bunch of things about flow, but it is very individualized. So, you have everything you need within to tap into and figure out what's going to work best for you. So here's a couple of additional resources. There was a really great TED Talk, Diane Allen. She's pretty well known in kind of the flow space, but she is I think she's a violinist, and it was kind of really neat. She kicked off her TED Talk by playing the violin. So it was a really neat kind of insightful TED Talk. So I encourage you to, if you have some time, it's about 15 minutes or so. Stephen Coulter also is pretty well known in the flow space. I was doing a bunch of research and I quite liked his how he presented, especially the connection between flow state and your performance, right? Your optimized brain. And then there were a couple of articles on LinkedIn. There was one specifically, we talked about the 4 stages of the flow cycle. So this will go a little bit more in depth into each of those cycles. It gives you some good examples. And then the final link is a whole review on the role of neuroscience of flow states. I mean, so I would encourage you, if you're interested in, kind of that aspect of delving into what a flow state is, how it's kind of what research has been done, definitely check that out as well. But there is a lot of, especially over, I would say, the last 10 years, there's been quite a bit more research. And as we've, moved through this pandemic, there's been a renewed sense of, wow, the flow state can be really useful. How do we access it? So there's definitely that renewed interest in flow. And from there, I also wanted to share with you some things that we have coming up in the well-being space, if you would like to engage more in what we're offering. We are going to be kicking off Alamo Active. It's a 4-week movement-based program. Doesn't matter where you are in your movement journey, if you're just starting out, or maybe you're trying to get back to it, or maybe you're an avid cyclist, whatever that looks like for you, this is just going to be a program that supports you, getting you back into moving more. We do live in kind of a very sedentary environment in what we do, but also just day-to-day living. So we have some info sessions coming up over, we have one today, right after this, actually at 10:15, but we also have one tomorrow and then 2 more next week. We will record the info session. So if this is something that you're interested in, and maybe you're not able to attend, feel free to reach out to me and we can, I can send you the recording to give you a little bit more information, what that looks like, and then how to register. And then we also are doing a 10-part financial wellness series. We have 2 sessions coming up later this month on tax savvy living. So if that topic is of interest to you, or maybe you're interested in seeing what else is being offered, what other financial wellness sessions are being offered, those are all within Alamo Talent. So you can go on the Alamo Well page and check those out as well. And finally, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this session. I hope it was kind of refreshing, if you will. I appreciate you attending today. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Again, my name is Kristi Docwra. So I hope to hear from y'all and hope you will join us in some other sessions moving forward.